read something recently and it said, what is the silliest thing that you've done in your life? And the response was that I wished I was an adult. Right? When we're kids, we want to grow up, but then when we become adults, we realize we had it really good when we were little kids. And for all its struggles, adult life is pretty good. It's quite enjoyable. And one of the best things that I've noticed about being an adult is watching my siblings become parents and watching them deal with their children and help them to grow up to be good, responsible young people. And I love to watch, especially whenever my little nieces and nephews get yelled at. Not because I like to see them in torment, but because it usually goes something like this, right? Mom or dad yells at them, and the child very innocently says, well, Mom, Dad, why are you yelling at me? And they say, well, because I told you nicely 5 times, and you didn't listen to me. And so now I'm yelling. Pick up your shoes. Do your homework. Unload the dishwasher. Whatever it might be, do the thing now. Right? When they yell, it seems to get our attention. Or perhaps the other extreme, which you know you're in trouble when this happens, when mom or dad gets very, very quiet and says, you need to pick up your things now. You do it. Right? Most of the time they're nice, but occasionally they have to raise their voice to get our attention. Now, usually Jesus exhorts people to conversion by using beautiful images for heaven. Right? The most often used image is that of the banquet, the wedding feast. Right? That heaven is going to be this wedding feast that we ought to be motivated to get to. He also uses these images of the pearl of great price or the treasure hidden in a field, right? How could anyone not want to get that? If you are good and faithful, he usually tells us, then you will receive this great reward. Today is a little bit different. Right? Today, Jesus, in a sense, like a good parent when the child doesn't listen, raises his voice a bit. Right? Jesus speaks of condemnation. He speaks of hell. Right? And we don't like this generally. It sounds a little bit too judgy for our modern ears. In fact, I gave a homily on hell at the cathedral during my time there. It was during the season of Advent, which is pretty traditional to preach on the 4 last things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell. And after that last homily on hell, someone came outside and said, Father, I didn't like that homily. That's not the only time people have told me that, but particularly this time they didn't like it. Right? They said it didn't make me feel good. And the proper response to that is good. Right? Hell should not make us feel good. Right? It ought to motivate us. And it doesn't make us feel good because it challenges us. Right? It holds us responsible for our actions or for our lack of actions. And we don't like that. Right? We need to pay attention to this doctrine of the church on hell. Right? Because if we disregard it, then bad things will happen. Right? Hell can be used as a motivator for us. Right? Even the Catechism mentions this in its section on the teaching on hell. It's very clear. It says, we cannot be united with God unless we freely choose to love Him. But we cannot love God if we sin gravely against Him, or against our neighbor, or against ourselves. Right? That we cannot claim to love God if we don't also love our neighbors. This brings us to our gospel for today. And this wonderful parable of the rich man and Lazarus. And they are about as opposite as people could be. Right? The rich man is dressed in very fine clothes, purple garments, which were extremely expensive. If you were here a few years ago, you heard Father Sibley's homily during Holy Week about the purple and now they have to kill all these animals to get it and all snails or something. Go back and listen to his homily. but it's very expensive. Right? And he wore linen, and he dined sumptuously, not just on special occasions, but every single day. And then you have this man Lazarus, and it's very important that the rich man is unnamed. Right? Usually people of power, everyone knows them. Celebrities of the day. Right? But this man is unnamed. And yet Lazarus, we know him. We look up to him. And he was this man who had these sores on his body, who went hungry, who had even dogs licking the sores as he laid at the rich man's door. He laid at the rich man's door. Right? He's hard to miss. Imagine, right? I always like to remind people that we shouldn't just sort of gloss over things in Scripture because we've read them so many times. Really try to imagine this. You leave here and you're on a high because Mass was so beautiful and Father preached so wonderfully and you're just loving life. And you go home and you arrive at your home and there is someone with these gaping wounds all over their body laying at your doorstep, or maybe at the barrier, the carport, garage. And you can't pull your car in without swerving around them, or you can't walk in the house without stepping over this person. And if you love animals like me, it's even worse by the fact that there are these animals there licking this person's sores. There's no way that we would miss that. Or if we did, we would have to be completely blind. Right? This is what the Lord is trying to tell us. And as obvious as this may seem, the rich man did nothing. He did nothing. Jesus is not faulting him for not going to some far-off land, some distant country, and doing missionary work for the people over there. This person was lying at his door, and he did nothing to help him. Now, I've been thinking a lot about, in Genesis, at the very beginning of the Scriptures, how we hear that the serpent was the most cunning of all the animals. And the serpent is this image of the devil. The devil is very cunning. The devil is not this little cartoon guy dressed in red clothes with the trident and horns on his head. But the devil is much more subtle than that. Right? And I see this and I think about it a lot in the confessional. Right? People will come back after a long time and I'll ask them why they haven't been to confession. They'll say, oh, well, I kept committing the same sin and so I stopped going because I needed to get it right first. That's a good intention, right? People don't want to offend God and take His mercy for granted, but the devil is very cunning. And so he tempts us to not go to confession anymore because it's based off, even though it's based off of a good intention, because the devil knows that there's power in confession. And so he twists our good intention to keep us from doing what he knows is good. And so we don't hear why the rich man disregarded Lazarus or didn't even notice him, but we can imagine what those reasons might have been. Because they're probably the same reasons we use as excuses not to do what we ought to do. Right? Perhaps he said, well, I can't afford to take this guy in. Or maybe I'm just uncomfortable taking him in. I thought about The Blind Side when I read this. Right? I don't want to take this person in my home. I don't know who this is and what's going to happen, so I'm just not going to do that. Or maybe his thought was, well, if I give to him one time, he's going to come back and he's going to want something every day. And so I'm not going to give to him. I'm just going to pretend like I don't even notice him. Or maybe his thought was even, well, if I give to him, it's going to require something of me. Right? I'm going to have to change my lifestyle so that I have the means to be able to help him. And I don't want to do that. I'm not willing to change my lifestyle. But even given all of those excuses that the rich man could have thought, the ones that we use, there's something still so easy and obvious that he could have done that it's kind of shocking. Right? The gospel says Lazarus would have gladly eaten scraps that fell from the rich man's table. That would have required very little, close to nothing of the rich man. He simply would have had to say to one of his servants, hey, when you take this food away from the table after I've gorged myself, give what you take away to that poor man laying at my door who's having his wounds licked by dogs. I'm pretty sure the servant wouldn't have had to say, now, which man are you talking about? Which one that has the sores and is laying at my door is being licked by dogs? He would have known exactly who to give it to. Right? He couldn't even do the bare minimum to relieve Lazarus' hunger, even though it would have cost him little to nothing. Now, we don't like I don't know about you, I don't like these Gospels because it convicts me that I'm not doing enough. And we don't like talk about hell as this place of final and eternal punishment. Right? But the reality is that many people, like this rich man, live in hell long before they die. Imagine being so blind that you didn't recognize Lazarus at the doorstep. Right? That is a personal hell of its own. Right? He lived in this hell of fear of losing what he had built up. He lived in this hell of loneliness, right? Walled off from people around him. He lived in a hell of greed, not willing to give to those in need. And he lived most of all in this hell of ignorance of God's love. Right? He didn't know God's love, and so he wasn't able to show it to others. Now, we are kicking off today this wonderful week of Homecoming Week. And if you're a guest here and you've not been here in a while, you're probably thinking, Father, you are doing a great job of welcoming us back and making us feel at home. Right? You are inspiring me and making me so joyful. But isn't that why wisdom exists? Isn't this the whole reason we're here? To proclaim the love of Christ to those most in need. To the Lazaruses walking around campus, to those on our very doorstep here at Wisdom. And if you're here and you're visiting and you haven't been here in a while, you came back because in some way you experienced this. You experienced the care and the love of someone who reached out to you in your need. When you felt like someone with sores and dogs licking at you. Right? And the point of wisdom is to teach us to love God and to love our neighbors. To serve God and to serve our neighbors. Right? And we do that in a lot of ways. Two examples that jump out to me that have happened recently or will happen. Yesterday we had 15 guys from the baseball team, in addition to our regular men who help us once a month, to do work around this place. We call it Ora and Labora. We start with Mass, the prayer, and then we do work. Right? We labor to help keep this place up and running. Those people were willing to do this so that we can continue our mission at Wisdom. And on Wednesday, I will take a group of 5 students, and we're going to go to St. Joseph's Diner. We're going to serve those who are in need for dinner. Right? Because we have received from here, and we're called to give to those in need. We're called to welcome and to reach out to those who are lonely. We're called to teach students to give of their resources, right? Not to be greedy, but to be generous to others. Jesus raises his voice to us today, in a sense, for the same reason that good parents have to do this to their children from time to time. Right? To get their attention, to wake them up, and to put them on the right path that is going to lead them to happiness. So we pray that more and more we would be able to notice Lazarus on our doorstep, and that we would be able to invite Lazarus to make Wisdom a home away from home as we have it. And we do this so that one day we and many others along with us might be welcomed to our eternal home, to the wedding feast of the Lamb where Lazarus waits for us.